detectives stood right in his driveway. They looked inside his white van, asked him questions, and then they simply walked away. They had no idea that just a few feet beneath their boots, a missing 10-year-old girl was locked inside a secret soundproof concrete vault. For 3,096 grueling days, society presumed Natascha Kampusch was gone forever. Left entirely on her own, she didn't just survive an impossible nightmare. She mentally outmaneuvered a meticulously careful captor, orchestrated a heart-pounding daylight escape, and pulled off the ultimate act of defiance, legally seizing ownership of the exact house that stole her childhood. The morning of March 2nd, 1998, broke over Vienna, Austria, like any other crisp, late winter day. The city streets hummed with the familiar rhythm of commuters, heading to work, and students starting their week. Among them was 10-year-old Natascha Kampusch, dressed warmly against the morning chill. She stepped out of her family's apartment building to begin her daily walk to school. It was a route she knew well, a brief journey that should have been entirely unremarkable. There was no ominous shift in the weather, no subtle warning sign that the world as she knew it was about to fracture. For the young girl, it was simply a normal Monday. But fate had already set a devastating sequence of events into motion. As Natascha walked along her usual path, the bustling cityscape provided a false sense of security. Just a few blocks away from her home, a seemingly ordinary white minivan sat parked by the side of the road. It blended perfectly into the urban background, drawing no attention from passers-by. However, within a matter of agonizing seconds, that mundane vehicle became the catalyst for one of the most baffling mysteries in European history. Natascha was suddenly taken off the street and pulled inside the van. The sliding door shut, locking her away from the outside world. There were no loud alarms, no massive crowds to witness the disruption. In the blink of an eye, the 10-year-old girl simply vanished, swallowed completely by an overwhelming and sudden void. Hours later, the ordinary rhythm of the day shattered for Natascha's family. When the final school bell rang and the afternoon stretched into evening, Natascha did not return home. Her mother felt the initial twinge of worry rapidly spiral into an all-consuming panic. Frantic phone calls were made to the school, to the childminder, and to anyone who might have seen the young girl along her route. Every answer was the same. No one had seen her. The realization hit the family with a crushing weight. Their vibrant, independent daughter was missing. By nightfall, the Austrian police were notified, and the missing person report triggered an immediate and desperate response. The family's home, once a place of comfort, was instantly transformed into a nerve center of anxiety, waiting for a phone call that would not come. By the next morning, Vienna was on high alert. The community rallied together in a massive search effort. Helicopters swept over the city, police dogs sniffed through parks, and thousands of missing child posters bearing Natascha's face were plastered across public squares and storefronts. The investigation quickly zeroed in on a single crucial lead provided by a young witness, a white minivan. Investigators began the monumental task of tracking down and inspecting hundreds of similar vehicles across the region. Despite the sheer scale of the community's mobilization and the tireless work of the authorities, every lead dissolved into a frustrating dead end. The sudden void left by Natascha's disappearance seemed impossible to fill, leaving an entire nation grasping for answers. While the world above ground frantically searched for her, Natascha found herself thrust into an unimaginable reality, plunged into sudden darkness and isolation. Her primary thoughts were not just of her own predicament, but of the immense sorrow her absence was causing her loved ones. Reflecting on those terrifying early hours, she later shared a profound insight into her psychological battle.
I was, at the beginning, at the very first day, so crying because of my parents, because they didn't knew what happened to me, and it was so hard, and it was during the whole 8.5 years the same emotion, and I think it is, and it was.
Transitioning from the abrupt disappearance above ground, the narrative descends into the architectural manifestation of absolute control for the next 8.5 years. Natascha's entire physical universe was reduced to a subterranean concrete vault measuring a mere 5 square meters. This space was heavily reinforced, hermetically sealed, and completely devoid of natural illumination. From a psychoanalytical perspective, this environment was not merely a physical prison. It was an extreme chamber of sensory deprivation designed to systematically dismantle a captive's autonomy. The acoustic isolation was so absolute that the ability to traverse physical space or interact with a dynamic environment, her psychological universe was violently compressed to the dimensions of her cell. This profound spatial restriction shifted her cognitive baseline from natural childhood exploration to a state of hyper-vigilant endurance, attempting to preserve a sense of self within a space designed to erase it. Equally profound was the psychological impact of temporal disorientation. In a windowless void where sunlight never penetrates and seasons never change, the natural circadian rhythm is violently severed. Time quickly loses its linear progression, dissolving into an amorphous, disorienting continuum. Psychoanalytically, the absence of day and night creates a state of temporal suspension or psychological stasis. A child structures her understanding of reality and self-growth through daily routines, the setting of the sun and the changing of the calendar. Stripped of these crucial external chronobiological anchors, she was cast adrift in a timeless vacuum. The past became a distant, fading echo of a former life, while the future ceased to exist as a tangible, conceivable concepted. There was only an endless, repetitive present. To prevent total cognitive fragmentation against this severe chronobiological disruption, the psyche must manufacture its own reality. Denied external markers, Natascha had to construct an internal psychological clock, building a mental scaffolding to measure the immeasurable hours. She meticulously counted seconds and cataloged minor internal shifts to maintain a grip on a reality that was actively being denied to her. This subterranean world was meticulously constructed to induce complete dependency and erase the captive's sense of agency. Yet, within this extreme psychological vacuum, a remarkable mechanism of psychic survival was activated. When the external environment provides nothing but sensory starvation and spatial entrapment, the human mind must adapt to survive structural collapse. In this dark void, the absolute denial of physical freedom forced the cultivation of a profound internal resilience. Denied physical liberty, her mind sought refuge in the abstract, relying on an extraordinary internal fortitude to navigate the terrifying spatial and temporal disorientation. The 5 square meter cell, intended by its architect to be a tomb for her developing identity, inadvertently became the severe crucible wherein an unbreakable psychological endurance was forged. While Natascha fought a silent psychological battle beneath the earth, the world above was consumed by a massive yet fundamentally flawed investigation. The only tangible thread investigators had to pull was the fleeting memory of a young witness, a white minivan. In a sprawling metropolitan area, this clue was both a crucial starting point and a logistical nightmare. Authorities launched a massive dragnet, meticulously tracking down and inspecting more than 700 white vans matching the description. It was a painstaking process of elimination, driven by desperation and a rapidly ticking clock. The dragnet eventually led detectives straight to the doorstep of Wolfgang Pricklip, a 35-year-old communications technician. On paper, he was just another mundane name on a remarkably long list of vehicle owners. When officers arrived at his suburban home in Strasshof, they were standing mere feet above the hidden concrete vault. This encounter remains one of the most chilling missed opportunities in modern investigative history. The question that has haunted the public and the authorities for decades is how the mastermind managed to stand face to face with detectives and slip entirely through their grasp. From a psychological standpoint, the answer lies in a phenomenon often referred to as the mask of sanity. Human cognitive bias frequently leads us to expect perpetrators to look and act like the antagonists we see in fiction, erratic, nervous, or visibly unstable. Priklopil, however, weaponized his sheer ordinariness. When questioned by the authorities, he did not exhibit the micro-expressions of panic, avoidance, or guilt that trained interrogators typically look for. Instead, he presented himself as exceptionally polite, cooperative, and entirely undisturbed by the police presence. His steady demeanor projected the aura of a helpful, upstanding citizen rather than a frantic captor harboring a dark secret. He perfectly manipulated the psychological expectations of the detectives, lowering their defenses through absolute calmness. To cement this illusion, Priklopil provided an incredibly mundane and seemingly airtight alibi for his vehicle. He calmly explained that he had been using the white minivan to transport heavy construction rubble for ongoing renovations at his property. When officers glanced at the van, the visible dirt and debris perfectly corroborated his story. It was a masterclass in psychological deflection. By offering a logical, easily verifiable explanation for the van's condition, he successfully bypassed any deeper suspicion. The investigators, overwhelmed by the sheer volume of their 700-person suspect list and entirely disarmed by his cooperative nature, checked his name off their roster and walked away. They departed without realizing the tragic irony of the situation. The very construction materials he claimed to be transporting were likely the exact supplies used to build and conceal the subterranean cell located right beneath their boots. This critical blind spot highlights a tragic flaw in investigative psychology: the tendency to accept surface-level normalcy at face value. For Natascha, this missed clue meant the heavy door to the outside world was firmly sealed for another 8 years, leaving her to rely entirely on her own internal fortitude. The psychology of human survival is incredibly complex, and a child's ability to adapt to such profound isolation is both terrifying and awe-inspiring. We will dive deeper into Natascha's remarkable coping mechanisms and her intellectual rebellion in the upcoming segments. If you are captivated by these deep psychological analyses of true survival stories, make sure to subscribe to the Crime Evidence channel and hit the notification bell. Join our community as we continue to unravel the hidden layers of the human mind and explore how a trapped captive managed to mentally outmaneuver her captor. Stay tuned for Part 4, where we explore her incredible intellectual resistance. When the physical body is subjected to absolute confinement, the human psyche faces a critical bifurcation. It must either surrender to the sensory deprivation and undergo profound cognitive atrophy, or it must mount a fierce internal rebellion to preserve its structural integrity. In the bleak, concrete silence of her subterranean cell, Natascha chose the latter. Recognizing early on that her physical autonomy had been entirely stripped away, she instinctively pivoted to the only territory she could still fiercely defend: her own mind. Instead of allowing her cognitive development to be arrested in the darkness, she executed a brilliant psychological defense strategy. She actively demanded that her captor provide her with an extensive array of educational materials, including textbooks, dictionaries, and a functioning radio. From a psychoanalytical perspective, this demand was far more significant than a simple desire to alleviate the crushing monotony of isolation. It was a profound, calculated assertion of selfhood. By insisting on continuous intellectual stimulation, she was actively resisting the infantile regression that such severe captivity typically induces. A captor's ultimate objective is frequently complete psychological domination, systematically erasing the captive's independent identity until they are entirely subservient. However, by transforming her restrictive cell into a makeshift classroom, Natascha maintained a vital, unbroken cognitive tether to the external world. The radio waves that managed to pierce through the thick concrete walls were not merely delivering daily news. They were broadcasting undeniable proof that a vast, dynamic reality still existed outside her boundaries, and more importantly, that she still possessed a rightful place within it. Immersing herself in dictionaries and complex texts allowed her to continuously expand her vocabulary and cognitive frameworks, ensuring that while her physical environment remained unnaturally static, her intellect continued to mature gracefully into adulthood. She effectively became the sole architect of her own intellectual survival, meticulously building an impenetrable mental fortress that her captor could never successfully breach. This remarkable intellectual resistance was deeply intertwined with an extraordinary capacity for future-oriented projection. In environments deliberately designed to extinguish all optimism, the human mind can easily succumb to a debilitating state of learned helplessness. Yet, Natascha actively combated this encroaching despair by anchoring her psyche to a timeline that extended far beyond her current entrapment. She maintained a vivid, detailed internal blueprint of the future she was being denied, utilizing it as a robust psychological shield against the crushing weight of her immediate reality. She eloquently articulated this profound survival mechanism during an interview.
It was like that, especially at the years at the beginning. But then I had hope because I had so many plans for my life, and I didn't want to give up these plans, and so it was so important to survive and to be strong and to looking forward to some options and possibilities to escape.
This statement stands as a powerful testament to psychological resilience. By deliberately mapping out her future aspirations, she flatly refused to internalize the identity of a permanent captive. Her future goals functioned as an unyielding cognitive anchor, providing her with a concrete, logical reason to endure an otherwise unendurable present. Her mental focus strategically shifted from the immediate hardship of her physical environment to a calculated, long-term strategy of self-preservation. The textbooks, the radio broadcasts, and her unwavering commitment to self-education were the essential psychological tools she employed to keep that future vibrant and alive within her mind. This indomitable spirit demonstrates a staggering level of emotional intelligence and mental fortitude, decisively proving that even when absolute physical control is externally imposed, the human will to protect its own identity, intellect, and future can remain fundamentally unconquerable. In the later years of her captivity, a paradoxical shift occurred in Natascha's routine. Her captor began allowing her brief, highly monitored excursions into the outside world, such as quick trips to the grocery store or a local hardware shop. To an uninformed observer, these moments might appear as glaring opportunities for immediate escape or a desperate cry for help. However, from a psychological perspective, physical proximity to the public does not equate to freedom when the mind remains securely imprisoned. The invisible chains of coercive control are often far stronger than the concrete walls of a subterranean vault. Over the years, her captor had systematically engineered a psychological environment where absolute compliance was perceived as the only mechanism for survival. He maintained a suffocating proximity during these outings, constantly projecting a silent but lethal authority. The threat was not always overt. It was deeply embedded in a subtle glance, a shift in posture, and the deeply ingrained understanding of the severe consequences of defiance. Furthermore, the captor utilized a sophisticated method of psychological manipulation by introducing the threat of collateral damage. He explicitly conditioned her to believe that any attempt to signal for help would not only result in dire repercussions for herself, but would also endanger the lives of the innocent bystanders she approached. This placed an agonizing moral burden on a young, empathetic mind. She was forced to weigh her own desperate need for liberation against the potential harm she might inadvertently bring to a stranger. This internalized panopticon effect, the overwhelming feeling of being constantly watched and entirely at the mercy of an omnipotent observer, effectively paralyzed her decision-making process. The fear she experienced was not merely a fleeting emotion. It was a profound, systemic terror that dictated her every micro-movement and actively suppressed her natural survival instincts. The psychological phenomenon of learned helplessness further cemented this paralysis. After years of being conditioned to believe that his control was absolute and inescapable, breaking that deep-seated mental programming in a split second required a cognitive leap, her mind was temporarily unable to make, beyond the immediate threat posed by her captor. Natascha faced a colossal internal barrier regarding how the external world would perceive her. Years of extreme isolation and severe nutritional deprivation had taken a heavy toll on her physical appearance. She was pale, fragile, and visibly diminished. Psychologically, she was acutely aware of this stark contrast between her own physical state and the bustling, healthy individuals walking past her. She harbored a deeply paralyzing fear that if she were to break away and scream for help, strangers would look at her emaciated frame and seemingly erratic behavior and immediately dismiss her as unwell or mentally unstable. The thought of summoning the unimaginable courage to risk absolutely everything, only to be met with disbelief or sheer apathy from the very society she was trying to reach, was a risk too devastating to contemplate. This complex web of psychological manipulation and profound self-doubt is frequently misunderstood by the general public. Armchair critics often question the seemingly passive behavior of captives during such rare public exposures, failing to comprehend the sheer weight of prolonged psychological subjugation. Addressing this widespread misconception, Natascha eloquently articulated the reality of her internal struggle during an interview.
Projects for charity projects.
These days, what would you say stands between you and a perfectly normal life?
Also, ich habe mich langsam damit arrangiert, dass mein Leben, so wie ich es lebe, für mich normal ist. Wie andere Leute leben, weiß ich nicht so genau. Also ich kenne schon viele Menschen, aber ich denke, jeder betrachtet sein Leben als normal. Und so ist es jetzt meins.
Now it's been 10 years, and how do you see your future today? How do you see yourself in the coming years?
Also ich sehe mich in 10 Jahren oder in den nächsten Jahren so, dass ich immer mehr an mir selbst arbeite und später dann sagen kann, dass ich ein zufriedenes, ausgeglichenes Leben führe.
This poignant reflection serves as a crucial reminder that the barriers to freedom are not always constructed from steel and concrete. Often, the most insurmountable obstacles are the psychological walls built through years of calculated intimidation, making the simple act of crying out for help an incredibly complex and daunting impossibility. In the aftermath of her eventual return to society, one of the most profoundly misunderstood aspects of Natascha's ordeal was her psychological relationship with her captor. Public discourse often hastily labels any lack of overt, continuous hatred from a captive as a psychological anomaly, frequently misapplying the concept of Stockholm Syndrome to explain away complex survival tactics. However, a deeper psychoanalytical examination reveals a far more sophisticated and intellectually rigorous reality. For Natascha, maintaining a state of profound calm and actively choosing not to let hatred consume her soul was never a symptom of submission or misplaced affection. Rather, it was a remarkably sharp, highly calculated psychological defense mechanism, engineered specifically to protect her from a total internal collapse. In an environment where every physical variable was dictated by another person, regulating her own emotional landscape became her most powerful form of agency. To fully understand this strategy, one must consider the emotional economy of absolute confinement. Pure, unadulterated hatred is a volatile and incredibly exhausting emotion. It requires a massive, continuous expenditure of cognitive energy to sustain. In a microscopic, windowless cell where physical escape remains impossible, allowing rage to fester is akin to releasing a corrosive acid within a sealed container. It inevitably destroys the vessel itself. If Natascha had permitted her psyche to be entirely engulfed by the sheer injustice and despair of her situation, the resulting emotional implosion would have undoubtedly shattered her fragile psychological scaffolding. By neutralizing her anger, she successfully conserved the vital mental energy required to endure her daily reality, to educate herself, and to carefully maintain the elaborate internal blueprint of her future. Furthermore, this internal emotional regulation served to fundamentally reframe the power dynamic between captor and captor. By actively deciding to forgive the man controlling her in real time, she subtly dismantled his perceived omnipotence. Perpetual hatred often elevates a captor into an all-powerful, insurmountable monster in the mind of the captive. Forgiveness, conversely, reduces that same individual to a deeply flawed, inadequate, and pathetic human being. This cognitive reframing was a brilliant act of intellectual rebellion. It allowed her to look at the person who controlled her physical environment and quietly assert an undeniable moral and emotional superiority. He could dictate when the lights turned on or off, but she ensured he could never dictate the condition of her inner soul. This coping mechanism was entirely self-serving in the most crucial life-preserving sense. It was never about granting him absolution for his actions. It was exclusively about securing her own psychological survival. She recognized early on that holding onto a burning resentment would only bind her more tightly to the darkness of the concrete vault, allowing his actions to destroy her from the inside out. This powerful admission highlights the staggering resilience and adaptability of the human mind. Her ability to deploy radical forgiveness as a calculated shield against psychological annihilation is a testament to an extraordinary level of emotional intelligence. By contrast, on August 23, 2006, the sun rose over Strasshof just as it had for the previous 3,095 days of Natascha Kampusch's captivity. For a young woman who had spent her formative years navigating the psychological minefield of absolute confinement, this day initially bore all the hallmarks of her suffocating routine. She was instructed to clean her captor's vehicle in the driveway. The heavy front gate, a formidable barrier that had always stood locked and unyielding between her and the outside world, was inexplicably left ajar. It was a minuscule operational error by a man who had prided himself on meticulous, obsessive control as she meticulously maneuvered the vacuum cleaner inside the car. The loud, droning mechanical noise filled the air. Then, the unexpected happened. The captor's mobile phone rang. To hear the caller over the roar of the vacuum, he took a few crucial steps away, briefly breaking his visual and physical hold over her. In the realm of survival psychology, there exists a critical threshold, a fractional window, where the deeply ingrained conditioning of captivity collides with the primal, undeniable instinct for freedom. For 8.5 years, Natascha had been conditioned to believe that any attempt to flee would result in immediate, dire consequences. Yet the persistent intellectual resistance she had cultivated in her concrete cell had kept her mind sharp, waiting for a genuine tactical advantage. The humming vacuum cleaner provided the perfect acoustic cover, and the open gate presented a physical pathway. In that infinitesimally small fraction of time, she had to override a near decade of psychological subjugation. Reflecting on this monumental, life-defining pivot, she recounted the sheer clarity of her thought process.
That option, and I thought by myself, I have to do it now because it's a chance and maybe it works. And after then, I was so excited about my captivity, not the captivity, escape, of my escape and my freedom. And then I was a little bit shocked about the new experiences and about the new
opportunities and everything that
yes,
might
yes.
happen.
Leaving the vacuum cleaner running to maintain the auditory illusion of her presence, she dropped the hose and bolted. Every step was an immense physical and mental challenge. Her body, severely weakened by years of nutritional deprivation and lack of sunlight, was suddenly propelled by pure, unadulterated adrenaline. She dashed through the open gate, breaking the invisible perimeter of her captor's domain. She didn't just run down the street. She strategically darted through neighbors' gardens and scrambled over fences, desperate to throw off any potential pursuit. Her mind, previously operating in a state of hyper-vigilant preservation, was now entirely focused on a single objective: finding another human being who would recognize her reality and call the police. The architecture of control had finally fractured. The sheer magnitude of this escape highlights the extraordinary capacity of the human spirit to overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. If you are deeply moved by these meticulously detailed psychological breakdowns of survival and resilience, please make sure to subscribe to the Crime Evidence channel and hit the notification bell. Your support allows us to continue analyzing these incredible true stories of human fortitude and the power of the human mind. When Natascha finally encountered an older woman in a nearby garden who alerted the authorities, the 3,096 days of physical captivity officially ended. However, crossing the threshold into the daylight did not magically erase the labyrinth her captor had built within her mind. True liberation is a dual process. While the physical chains were broken in a matter of minutes, dismantling the psychological architecture of her captivity would require a lifetime of conscious effort. The transition from a highly controlled, static environment to an unpredictable, boundless world induced a profound cognitive shock. The weight of her stolen youth could not simply be left behind in the subterranean vault. Instead of succumbing to the gravity of her past, Natascha chose to integrate her survival into her identity with remarkable grace. She understood that moving forward required a radical acceptance of her history, coupled with an unwavering commitment to her own future. She articulated this lifelong psychological endeavor perfectly. That experience, you have to live with it in your head for the rest of your life. But you have to try to look at the positive aspects and look to the future. August 23, 2006, was not merely the day a captive ran away. It was the day a brilliant, resilient survivor successfully executed an 8-year strategic plan to reclaim her life. The 396 day stands as a permanent testament to the fact that while the body can be contained, an unbroken will can never truly be imprisoned. Stepping into the daylight on August 23, 2006, marked the end of Natascha Kampusch's physical confinement, but it instantly triggered a profound new psychological hurdle: the immense cognitive shock of re-entering a world that had not waited for her. For nearly a decade, her sensory input had been artificially restricted to the hum of a ventilation fan, the static walls of a 5-square-meter concrete vault, and the highly predictable routines dictated by a single individual. Suddenly, she was thrust into an infinite multi-dimensional reality. The sheer volume of visual, auditory, and spatial stimuli was utterly overwhelming. The physical horizon, which had been non-existent for 3,096 days, now stretched out endlessly. This sudden transition from extreme micro-isolation to macro-exposure induced a severe state of sensory overload, demanding a massive cognitive recalibration from a mind that had been forcibly kept in a state of spatial limitation. Beyond the immediate sensory shock, Natascha faced a jarring temporal and developmental disconnect. She had been swallowed by the earth as a 10-year-old child and emerged as an 18-year-old young woman. The world of 1998 had transformed completely by 2006. Society, technology, and culture had advanced at a blistering pace, leaving behind a staggering gap in her social timeline. While her peers had spent those 8 years navigating the natural complexities of adolescence, learning social cues, and gradually stepping into adulthood, Natascha's developmental milestones had been forcefully paused. She was tasked with the monumental psychological burden of bridging this chasm, learning to operate as an adult in a complex modern society while simultaneously processing the delayed grief for the childhood she never got to experience. Tragically, her return to society did not offer the quiet, nurturing sanctuary necessary for such delicate psychological healing. Instead of being granted a peaceful space to navigate her newfound freedom, she was immediately plunged into a second, highly visible form of captivity: the unrelenting glare of global media. Overnight, she became one of the most recognized faces on the planet. For a young woman who had spent years carefully guarding her internal emotions as a survival tactic, having her every word, facial expression, and gesture analyzed under a public microscope was a profound intrusion. The flashing cameras and persistent journalists created a metaphorical panopticon, replacing the singular, controlling gaze of her former captor with the insatiable collective stare of millions. Compounding this intense media scrutiny was the deeply unsettling rise of baseless public rumors. Human psychology often struggles to process profound anomalies without assigning elaborate fictionalized narratives to them. The terrifying reality that a single, seemingly ordinary man acting alone could orchestrate such a prolonged crime completely unnoticed was too uncomfortable for many to digest. Consequently, society projected its own anxieties onto her story, generating wild, unfounded conspiracies that actively questioned the established facts of her ordeal. She found herself in the agonizing, deeply unfair position of having to constantly defend her own lived reality against an invasive and frequently skeptical public. Navigating this chaotic reintegration required a different, yet equally formidable, type of psychological resilience. Escaping the concrete vault was a triumph of intellectual survival, but surviving the profound shock of the real world demanded an extraordinary capacity to establish firm personal boundaries. Despite the overwhelming noise, the glaring lights, and the heavy expectations of society, Natascha slowly but deliberately began to reclaim her narrative. She refused to be broken by the pressures of the modern world, demonstrating that her fierce independence could withstand both the silence of the vault and the deafening roar of the public eye. In the wake of Natascha Kampusch's escape and the subsequent conclusion of the initial police investigation, the Austrian legal system was faced with the complex task of determining appropriate compensation for her stolen years. In an extraordinary and highly publicized turn of events, the court awarded her the legal ownership of the very property in Strasshof where she had been hidden for 3,096 days. To the general public and casual observers, this decision appeared deeply perplexing, and to some, even morbid. Why would anyone willingly bind themselves to the architectural blueprint of their own profound suffering? The media quickly sensationalized the acquisition, attempting to frame it within a tragic or pathological narrative. However, looking through a psychoanalytical lens, her decision to accept the deed to the house was neither an act of twisted nostalgia nor a symptom of unresolved trauma. Instead, holding the keys to that specific property represented the ultimate undeniable reversal of power. For 8.5 years, that house functioned as a panopticon of absolute control, a physical manifestation of her captor's dominance. Every door, every lock, and every wall had been meticulously designed to strip her of agency and dictate her reality. By legally acquiring the property, Natascha fundamentally dismantled that dynamic. She transformed the site of her former subjugation into a tangible asset over which she held complete, unequivocal sovereignty. The psychological significance of this shift cannot be overstated. The captor had spent nearly a decade trying to reduce her to a mere possession hidden within his house. By seizing the deed, she rendered him entirely obsolete, reducing his entire legacy to a piece of real estate that she now legally commanded. She went from being a prisoner within the walls to the undisputed master of the estate. Furthermore, her ownership served a deeply protective and highly strategic purpose. If the property had been placed on the open real estate market or seized by the state, it would have inevitably fallen into the hands of strangers. Natascha possessed a profound understanding of the morbid curiosity that drives human nature. She acutely realized that in the possession of someone else, the house could easily be transformed into a macabre tourist attraction, a dark museum dedicated to her personal suffering. People would flock to peer into the driveway or step inside the rooms to consume her tragedy as true crime entertainment. By holding the keys, she established an impenetrable barrier against this grotesque exploitation. She retained the absolute right to lock the gate, draw the blinds, and deny the world access to the space. Controlling the physical real estate meant she retained ultimate control over her own narrative, ensuring that her childhood would never be commodified by onlookers. Perhaps the most powerful and symbolic action she took as the new legal owner was her decision regarding the subterranean concrete vault itself. Rather than leaving it intact as a haunting reminder of the past, she took decisive action to neutralize its existence. Natascha orchestrated for the 5-square-meter cellar to be permanently filled and sealed off. This was not merely a construction project. It was a profound act of psychological closure. By filling the void with solid earth and concrete, she physically erased the epicenter of her isolation. The architectural manifestation of her captivity was literally buried, ensuring that no one could ever step foot inside that oppressive space again. It was a deeply cathartic and definitive statement. She did not just walk away from her prison. She systematically dismantled its capacity to hold any future power. Ultimately, the key to the house in Strasshof became the literal and metaphorical instrument of her psychological liberation. It was a profound triumph, proving that true agency is not just about escaping a physical boundary, but about returning to the site of that boundary and declaring absolute ownership over it. She took the very weapon used to isolate her and transformed it into a shield that protected her privacy and dignity. This brilliant strategic move allowed her to close a dark chapter of her life on her own uncompromising terms, demonstrating a level of mental fortitude and strategic foresight that continues to command immense respect. She did not just survive the house, she conquered it entirely. Escaping the concrete vault was a monumental physical victory, but the true testament to Natascha Kampusch's indomitable spirit is how she chose to architect her life in the aftermath of her liberation. Many observers quietly assumed that after losing her entire adolescence to extreme isolation, she would inevitably fade into the background, forever defined and limited by the profound hardship she had endured. Instead, she chose to step fully into the light, transforming a narrative of extreme deprivation into a profound masterclass in human resilience, reinvention, and psychological triumph. Re-entering society required her to bridge a staggering developmental and educational gap. With the same fierce determination that kept her mind sharp in the darkness, she pursued her formal education, proving that her intellectual curiosity remained unbroken. But perhaps her most significant triumph was the reclamation of her own narrative. For years following her escape, the global media and the public had attempted to write her story for her, filling the void with baseless assumptions, misinterpretations, and sensationalized rumors. In 2010, she took the ultimate step in establishing her autonomy by publishing her autobiography, 3096 Days. This international bestseller was not merely a recounting of events, it was a powerful, uncompromising declaration of selfhood. By putting pen to paper, Natascha seized the narrative back from the tabloids, ensuring that the world heard the unvarnished truth directly from the survivor herself. Her courage extended far beyond the written word. Refusing to hide from the public eye, she stepped in front of the camera not as a fragile subject of breaking news, but as a confident television host. She conducted interviews and engaged with the world on her own terms, demonstrating a remarkable social adaptability. Furthermore, she channeled her profound understanding of confinement and vulnerability into passionate advocacy. Having experienced the crushing weight of captivity firsthand, she became a vocal supporter of animal rights, drawing poignant parallels between her own ordeal and the plight of caged animals. She also dedicated significant time and resources to charitable causes, funding humanitarian projects and advocating for the most vulnerable members of society. She masterfully transformed her deepest pain into a powerful catalyst for global compassion. The profound life lesson embedded in Natascha's extraordinary journey is one of radical psychological rebirth and the limitless potential of post-traumatic growth. Her story teaches us that human beings possess a staggering, almost miraculous capacity for regeneration. No matter how severely external circumstances attempt to restrict our growth, silence our voices, or dim our inner light, the fundamental core of our identity remains ours to command. Hardship and profound adversity may alter the trajectory of our lives, but they do not hold the pen that writes our final chapter. We always retain the sovereign power to choose how we respond, how we heal, and how we rebuild. Natascha teaches us that true freedom is not merely the absence of physical walls, it is the active daily choice to embrace the future, to pursue knowledge, and to adamantly refuse to be defined by the darkest moments of our past. She proves that the human spirit is not a fragile glass that shatters under pressure, but a diamond forged in the very depths of the earth. The human mind is a fortress of unimaginable strength, capable of weathering the fiercest storms, outwitting the darkest circumstances, and emerging into the daylight with grace and purpose. If Natascha Kampusch's incredible journey of survival, psychological resistance, and ultimate triumph has moved and inspired you, we invite you to become a permanent part of our community. Please hit the subscribe button, give this video a thumbs up, and click the notification bell for crime evidence. By subscribing to our channel, you help us continue to bring you these deep, analytical, and empowering explorations of true human resilience. Share this video to spread the powerful message that no darkness is permanent, and the human will to live will always find a way to break free. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to seeing you in our next deep dive into the extraordinary power of the human psyche.